I'm Jackie Doucette, and I'm on a mission to discover exactly what life is like beyond retirement. Join me while I chat with people who've already done it, who've retired to something rather than from something. Let's find out together exactly what's waiting for us when we say goodbye to that 9 to 5. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Retirement. Today, I'm joined by Olympic gold medalist Joe Jacobi, who is also a performance coach and an author. Joe, thanks for joining me today.
Jackie, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
So usually I start the show by asking my guests to talk a little bit about themselves, where they came from, what they're doing, how they got where they are now. Can you tell us a little bit about you?
Yeah, thank you. Where to start? So I am talking to you today from my home in La Seu d'Urgell, which is a town of 12,000 people in the Spanish state of Catalonia. And there is a big window next to me, and just about 50 meters outside of my window is the 1992 Olympic canoeing venue, where my doubles canoe partner, Scott Strasball, and I won a gold medal at the Olympic Games in 1992, which was America's first ever Olympic gold medal in whitewater canoeing. And my canoe partner and I spent a lot of time here preparing for the Olympic Games, but a lot of that preparation, it wasn't really just for the race. It was really aligning with and becoming a part of the culture and the community here in this Pyrenees mountain town. And that was just the most amazing part of the Olympic experience. So many years later, and that was about 5.5 years ago, when I had the opportunity to make a quality of life change, to create a quality of life adventure in my very late 40s, I jumped at it. And I now live in La Seu d'Urgell. I learned to speak Catalan. I do all of my work as a performance coach virtually online. And that is about me. I love to write. I love to create. I focus on deep and meaningful connections with the people I care about most. And that's my life.
Wow. Sounds like you're definitely living the dream for most of us.
It's a process. I just think it's a process for everyone. And I think a lot about process and systems and environments. And I think a lot about, especially right now, about this transition between the first half of life and the second half of life, and what does that mean? And I think part of that, Jackie, I don't know if I think so much about, I do think a little bit about the dream in terms of like what I'd like to have or what I would like to do. But I also have put a lot of time into putting some meaning and context into what led me to here, because not all of that is so pretty. Not all of that is so nice. Like I wouldn't trade the first half of life for anything. But oh my gosh, like there was a lot of going back and making some sense of and finding some meaning in. And that's not always a comfortable process, but I think if we're willing to do that, I think it opens up incredible and beautiful transitions in these second half, these chapters that exist in the second half of life.
Yeah, I think so too. And I guess that's to be expected. You're not going to, or very few people are going to have a nice, easy life all the way along where they flow from one thing into another very simply. There's going to be some challenges as they transition from one stage to another. And I know you do a lot of work with people to help them get through those transitions and surmount the obstacles that are in their life. And I was wondering if you could maybe talk a little bit about how you might help people adjust to the transitions in the later part of their life to make it, the life that they want.
So, yeah, I would love to do that. And Jackie, I think where I might start on this is that about 8 or 9 years ago, I started to write a weekly article, a Sunday morning blog called Sunday Morning Joe. And it had a lot of flavor of performing well in life. But about a year ago, I wrote an article and I just said about 1,000 people sign up, subscribe to Sunday Morning Joe. And I said, look, there's a topic I'm really interested about. It's kind of predicated on the question is, what does it mean to fully engage with the second half of life? I said, I have a lot more questions than answers, but this is where I'd like to focus my energy. It's kind of selfish, but I also think it's interesting. So if this isn't your thing, this is a great time to jump off the bandwagon and unsubscribe. And you probably know what I'm going to say next. It's kind of the opposite happened. No one unsubscribed and people wanted to talk more about it. And as I wrote about this process and just my own experiences, I just started to think about not only the unique transitions, but also what do I bring that might be just a slightly different way of looking at it or working through this transition. So it's like first is to acknowledge that it is a big transition. Like I think it's very easy to see it's there. I also think it's very easy to not want to do anything about it because change is hard. Working through making sense of choices that maybe you're not especially proud of, or maybe working with the fact that we've suppressed our inner voice for a lot of years before finally listening to it. It's hard. Not everyone wants to do it, but presuming people are interested in making the most of that transition, I started to ask the question, what if we paired that with some of the core principles of high performance, of peak performance in sport? And I just sort of took some of those basic ideas and basic principles of what I had been practicing and kind of overlaid it with this transition. And that is kind of became just a point for me to reflect, to ask questions and to learn more. Because I think the one thing you won't really hear me do is like, there's not one right way to do it. You and I can't do this work for someone else. I mean, people literally have to raise their hand and say, I want to work on this. I want to, I want to see a future, a potential where my peak performance days exist ahead of me, not behind me. And I know it's possible. I know it's doable because this process allows us maybe for the first time in our life, to define what peak performance is, not have someone else define it for us.
And that was going to be my next question, actually. I think a lot of people, ordinary, everyday people, might shy away from the idea of peak performance without thinking about what it actually means to them. Yeah. And it doesn't necessarily mean you're, at the pinnacle of life. It means you're at the pinnacle of your life.
Oh, I love that. Maybe we can sort of dive a little deeper into this idea about what is peak performance, because I think it's really easy to turn on the television, to be watching the very best athletes in the world. And we're thinking, oh my gosh, they're so gritty and they're so resilient and they dig deeper and it's tougher. To me, that's not really the essence of peak performance. Like, I think it's a lot more in the area of focus, consistency, having purpose in what you do, a course correcting, how we fix mistakes. They're very doable concepts. It's really just our willingness to act on them consistently. And I think it's sort of accepting a mindset of learning and growth, not a fixed mindset, but a growth mindset. And I think part of doing that, I think sort of two little points of high performance that we don't hear about very often, but I believe are a big part of the equation. If we want to learn better, I think two things paired together that work really nicely is practicing gratitude together with that ability to be a little bit kinder and gentler with ourselves. We put those two things together, gratitude and self-kindness. You really open up the door for being a little bit easier on yourself. You're grateful for what you have which then in turn, I think opens, almost like builds a pathway for being more consistent, more focused, being a better learner, and really executing on some of those elements of peak performance, no matter what the activity is. So all of a sudden, it's not about being like, an Olympic gold medalist or performing at that level, but it's really whatever you really want to apply that to at this stage of life, whether that's connecting with people, whether that's creativity, whether it's your health. There's a lot of things that we can do with this when we look at peak performance in this way, or sort of what I call midlife peak performance.
And I think that's great because it gives people the chance or the opportunity to step back a little bit and say, okay, what can I do? What am I willing to try to do today? Or what am I willing to try to do this week? And to not beat themselves up if they don't make it all the way to the end at that goal. They can be grateful for how far they got. They can, step up and start the goal from the new position the next day. And one of those things that I've talked about with a few guests before are the little wins, the things like James Clear in Atomic Habits and Darren Hardy with the compound effect. It's all the little things compounded that you do over and over that make the difference. And if people can just kind of remember that each day you're starting from a new spot, you're not back there anymore. You're always moving forward.
I love that. But when I ever hear Atomic Habits mentioned, I always love sharing my favorite quote from the book, or a favorite expression, which is consistency over intensity. And I think that we live in a world where anyone of any age can scroll social media and make it looks like the extremes are the new normal. And it's just not the case. When we witness someone do something incredible or extreme on social media, we're seeing like the 5-second clip of what worked. We're not seeing the hours of painstakingly, idiotic mistakes and crashes and falls they made before that, just to be able to post that 1 5-second video. And, I think at the root of that idea of consistency over intensity is, there's a trust in the process that, we've used it at other parts in our life. I think a lot of this is just learning how to tune into our own voice, trusting that, and how to get better at sort of tuning out the noise that exists elsewhere. Like, I think that's a big part of this process. It's not easy. It's simple, but not easy. It's so counterintuitive to think that these little steps are making a difference, but it's about trusting the process. And the idea that, listening to our own voice, not the voices of others. That's the part that I think it's a simple concept, but it's not easy to do. Simple, but not easy. But if we can just sort of give ourselves the space to experiment with that. And I know that we're always looking for kind of the big, like, if I do a small step, like, how did it make me feel? What's the result that seems better today? That I think we just have to trust a little bit that when we try something new, when we're trying to establish a new habit or learn a new skill, a big part of it is we're just trying to teach our mind and our body how to speak to each other about this and sort of say, oh, something's changing here. We're working on something. That's the part of the process that I'm working on trusting. And when I'm sort of setting the bar really, really low with lots of small steps forward every day.
And I think, that's so true. It's hard to see the progress when it's small. And a lot of people get frustrated when they don't see that progress. But that it goes back to the small changes, the consistency that you talk about. That curve that's going to eventually take you up to the top. If you can just hold on to the little changes each day and keep moving forward, that's going to make the difference, I think.
I think Jackie, I think one of the things I'll just, add on to that is are there ways we can teach ourselves how to appreciate the small steps a little bit more? And one way, I think there are a lot of ways to do it. One way I like to do this is I like to talk about getting outside and getting out into nature. When I say getting out into nature, I don't mean going out into a national park or remote area in the middle of nowhere. But it can be a local park, it can be a little trail, it can be a fallen leaf on a sidewalk. But I think when we start to notice the little small details about nature, I think that is a way of learning how to appreciate the little things, the small details. And I think if we make a practice of doing that, then it becomes a little bit easier when we start to want to work on a skill or develop a habit. That's where I think one way that we can actually work on appreciating the little things by spending a little bit more time outdoors and in nature.
And I think what that does, what you're suggesting, I think, is the idea of just being present in the moment wherever you happen to be, so that you're paying attention to, everything that's going on.
Absolutely. Love that. I love that.
I mentioned in the intro that you're an author and you wrote a book called Slalom.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what's in the book and who your target audience is for that book?
Yeah, both are good questions. And so I started canoeing when I was I was 8 years old at summer camp. I was 10 years old before I liked it. And when I was 12, I got hooked in, I guess you could say, to one of the greatest training groups in the history of our sport, whitewater canoe slalom. And I didn't get hooked into that group because I was especially good. I just got hooked into that group because I showed up every day and I liked them. They were nice people and they welcomed me. But the book kind of encompasses these 40 plus years, more than 4 decades of paddling rivers, navigating whitewater river rapids, and transferring those skills to navigating the river of life. So I use the river as a metaphor and an analogy. And I figured out at a pretty young age that the river was teaching me. I mean, I always cite the river as being my best life coach. I think there are just very fundamental, sound, scientific, and mathematic, equations and reasons that rivers do what they do that I think are often very applicable to life. I know people love talking in sports analogies, and I think basketball and football are great sports, but you know what I don't believe about those analogies in life is that when things are going bad, you don't get to just call timeout. And on the river, you don't get to just make the river stop and go take a rest. The river keeps moving. And like life, it keeps moving. And there are ways to take rest and take break, but you don't get to stop the river. And, there were just these lessons about the river. And I've been just tracking them for a long time. Even after having success at the Olympics, I had a coach tell me that he said, listen, if you want to do public speaking, especially about your lessons learned from your Olympic success, you should think about this. It's going to be a very short window in which people are actually interested in what you did at the Olympic Games. And it's going to be a much longer, bigger window of how what you did at the Olympic Games can be helpful to other people. So the quicker that you can transfer those lessons learned to really help people and meet them where they are, you'll do this as long as they want. So I've been kind of tracking these stories for years, and I put them together in this book. And I lay them out into 6 river classes because a river has 6 classes of rapids. And it's a really nice way. And the last thing I'll say about the book, Jackie, is that when you start to read it, you'll see it's not really about my canoe partner and me. It's really about you and your journey with the river. We're kind of like guides in the story, but you're the hero. You're the one navigating the river. And I think from that standpoint, that's what I'm probably most proud of about the book, the way it came out. I just I'm not really someone to say, hey, this is how you should live. I'm just trying to put information, models, environments, mindsets out there in a way that people can say, oh, that's a great way to see, get a perspective on what I'm doing, or that's a great way of looking at it, at an obstacle that I'm facing. So like, I love talking about rocks in the river and applying those to sort of rocks as obstacles in the middle of our river of life. I could talk about this kind of thing for hours, but I think it's a very visual and a very feeling, kind of a kinesthetic way of feeling our perspective and how we're thinking about the way we think.
So it's aimed at anybody who's trying to traverse life.
Yeah, at the time I wrote it, I would say that. And now what I would say is that because I've focused my my attention on a more narrow group of people and people working through these midlife transitions, I think the book is great for that. Like, I think it's the transition of first to second half of life is a very deep reflection. And I think absorbing, reading, content, conversation, and reflection that helps you think about these things a little bit more deeply and how you go about it. It's not a map for doing that. I just think it helps put people in a good disposition for thinking about how they're thinking about things and what they're capable of doing.
Okay. So I'll know that the link to that is in the show notes so people can go and take a look, even if they're not thinking about traversing any rivers in the next little while. Maybe they've got a few obstacles that it'll help them through.
Well, I will say one thing. This activity, paddling on rivers, is not a bad activity when we talk about retirement either. Like, there's actually a lot of good things that I think come along with it. Like, this is not like full on, class 6 adventure mode. What I think is neat about whitewater, and I think really appeals to me, because I'm still active in the sport and I'm active about, in a way, I think about it, how people are learning it. And by the way, my partner, Maria, who is about the same age as me, she had never paddled before, learned to paddle in her 50s. We paddle a doubles canoe together. And why I think it's a good activity to be thinking about in this chapter of life is that we get to tap into an amazing source of energy, the flow of the river. So we're not just dependent upon our own strength, but we're really thinking about how we align with the strength of something bigger, stronger than us. That is something that's like a kind of wisdom, a kind of just a level of awareness that I think we, in a latter chapter of life, could probably attend to better than someone in their 20s or 30s that just wants to beat the river and fight the current and, be the hero out on the water. I think when we sort of give ourselves into the current, oh my gosh, we can do so much more with it. So I even think literally as an activity to do, it's pretty good.
But you're not biased.
No, I'm not. But I do think, there are a number of gravity sports. I really do think about this a lot. What are the right ways to kind of keep the mind and body engaged at different stages of our life? We're not going to do everything forever. I'm not thinking about doing my sport forever either, but I do believe that if you find the right sports that do what I was talking about, like tapping into larger energy forces, gravity sports, but also the cost of making a mistake is not as physically risky as some other sports. So like 2 examples, you have whitewater kayaking and you have snowboarding. If you fall over in a kayak, you're falling into water. There's things to learn. There's elements of safety to learn in doing that, but you're falling into water, which I think is different than falling into hard packed snow. I think that can have a different effect literally on our bodies and our framework. I'm not saying don't try snowboarding and just try kayaking, but I do think about these things. I think staying healthy is the best way to enjoy retirement. If we put our body, mind, and spirit in a good position to stay healthy, that's going to create the best disposition for us to show up day to day, try new things, learn new things, and make the most of the chapter that we're currently in.
I was going to ask you for a piece of advice, and I think you just gave that to me. That's
I think that, it's interesting. While I'm doing an activity, like I'm not thinking about injury avoidance, but I do think about it when I'm planning, when I'm thinking about planning out the year, planning out the 3 years, thinking about what do I want, especially out of physical movement and sport activity. Part of, I have big motivations to stay healthy, as does Maria. It's not to compete in the canoe or kayak. If I talk about kayaking relative to the adventures that we do out in the ocean, out in the sea, the main reason we want to stay healthy and be able to do the activity for a long time, it's just to see beautiful things on the water. Maybe even one day, like how cool would it be to see a whale from a kayak? Like I know there's risk in doing that, but our best chances of doing that is by maintaining a healthy disposition, which gives me a lot of motivation and purpose and reason to get out of bed and sort of execute a certain way every day. And the longer that I can do those kinds of things and sustain those activities, like that would be great. But I am being thoughtful about how to how to choose activities that are going to lower the likelihood that I'm injured or have to recover from injury. And I do think that's really wise words. And as we get started with anything, that's the main reason to take something slow and start slow, learn the movements right, and put your body, mind, and spirit in the best position possible to learn and grow and acquire new skills and experiences.
And I think that those words or that advice holds true for learning anything. It doesn't have to be something completely physical. You can, follow the same path with anything that you're learning.
Creativity, absolutely. I think developing as a writer is something that I continue to do and want to do more of. And there's an inner game in there. There's a very, when I say the inner game, the mental side of the game, yeah. I think is, there's a lot of kind of inner wrestling and inner peacemaking that goes along with that. And you're right. Like it's still, it's still a process. It's still a journey. But, and then I think it's really fun to sort of pair some of those parts together, like trying to have elements of health and wellness that I'm pursuing and kind of matching that with doing creative pursuits at the same time. So, as I spend time outside and moving in nature, yeah, I seem to kind of work out ideas in writing and topics to write about, or maybe something that I've really been tripping upon or stumbling upon for a long time. That usually doesn't happen by just sitting in front of the screen and writing. It often happens by just moving outside in nature and letting go and noticing those little small things about nature. And you open yourself to new ideas and new opportunities and new ways to change.
So I think from what you've been saying, the best way to, in your opinion, to move forward through this, into our second part of our life is to recognize the challenges, look for ways to traverse the obstacles that are there.
Love it.
Get out in nature, pay attention to what's going on around you, learn from the mistakes you made, and just kind of keep moving forward every day.
It's a beautiful summary. You do a great job with this. I think that'll be a wonderful way to kind of encapsulate the conversation. Maybe if you would be okay with it, if I just would share one last piece that I find myself coming back to, and I'd actually love to ask you about this as well and hear your thoughts on it, is about how, the sense of purpose. And what I'm just curious, Jackie, like, what is the role of purpose play in your life on a day-to-day basis at this chapter of your life?
I think purpose is the most important thing. You've got to figure out what it is that's driving you, what's getting you out of bed every morning, so that when your feet hit the floor, you're happy, you're ready to start the day. It doesn't have to be some grand purpose. It's just got to be something that means something to you, so that you'll keep going.
I love that. I've also arrived at the same conclusion. Like, I think that is the starting point. And as someone who hasn't always been so good with purpose, I kind of thought if I wrote it down, like I was married to that purpose and like that was it. And it's taken a while to get here. And also I've given some thought about like what it means to think about purpose in latter chapters of our life compared to the earlier ones. And one of the kind of the feelings that I've come across is that what helps me to do what you just said about like having that reason to kind of get out of bed and feel happy about how you're getting out of bed each day is that we're kind of balancing out that purpose between our inner self and our outer self. I mean, I kind of come back to this point that I think not everyone, but I think a lot of us have probably leaned very heavily on the outer self to set purpose and direction for a long time. And I think learning how to really give inner voice and our inner self a say in developing that purpose, that to me was a huge change in how I engaged with creating that. So that was just something that I landed on. I don't know if you've thought about that relative to how purpose has evolved in your life and sort of how it sits with you maybe today versus like in some earlier chapters in your life.
Oh, for sure. I mean, in earlier life, your purpose, as a young adult, your purpose is graduating from university, for example. It's a very external marker that, that's set in front of you, and then succeeding in your career, whatever that might be, having a healthy family. Those are all very external things. And I think as we age, those things have either been met or not, but we start to turn into ourselves because we're kind of questioning who we are and what we're meant to do. And that's where, thinking, being more thoughtful about what it is you're trying to achieve makes all the difference, because it's who you are inside and what you're striving for that's going to ultimately make you happy.
This is the part of the conversation I've just come to love, where I think the beauty of it really exists. I just think, if I even think back to my belief about, fully engaging with life and even thinking about fully engaging when I was younger with sport, as an athlete, I think at this stage of life, it's exactly what you just talked about. I think how we really open up those pathways so that we can really start to give some space, some amplification to that inner voice and inner self. I think it's really easy to avoid doing. I think, you never know what that process is going to bring up for people. So I always like to say it may not be the happiest work you'll ever do, but I do think it is arguably some of the most meaningful work you'll ever do.
Yeah, I think it'll probably be not only not the happiest, it's going to be the hardest work to do.
Exactly. I mean, it's like we've liked what the, having a more maybe externally driven purpose has brought to us. Like, it's brought to us a lot of good things, and there's plenty of space to acknowledge that. We're not shutting it down, but we are. I think the idea of trying to find more more balance, more equilibrium in the purpose process is phenomenal. Like, I think it's just it's harder to do at a younger age, and I think when you acknowledge it for the reasons that you spoke about, finding your people, finding your place in the world. There's your identity. Now we really have a chance to do something different. Not everyone is up for that challenge. That's the thing. People ask like, oh, when do you notice people starting to go through this? Well, people can start to pay attention to this pretty early on in their life. Some people can get to 80 and just say, no, thank you. I'm not interested in going there. And it's not a judgmental thing. It's just acknowledging, like you said, it's not easy. It's change. It's hard.
Yeah. And it's okay to just say, I'm happy just being me, and, kind of float through your life. That's okay too.
It is what you and I are talking about right now. My hope is people are listening, that it just offers some reflection to how you're already thinking about it. These aren't like rules for how to think about it, but just to kind of help put some context on how you're thinking about what's best for you. And that's what I really appreciate about these kind of podcasts like you have, and the kind of conversations that you and I are having today.
Well, Joe, thank you so much for spending some time with me. I've really enjoyed the conversation. I'm sure that the listeners have gotten a lot out of it, even if they're not whitewater canoers or kayakers. Or there's a lot of food for thought.
There's still time, Jackie.
And I'll make sure that your blog page is in the show notes, the Sunday Morning Joe, and your book. Is there anything else that you'd like to share with the listeners?
Well, listen, as long as my contact information is in the show notes, that's great. Of course, if people want to find me on LinkedIn, I do post a lot there, but I love meeting people. I love hearing their stories. And so I think if people feel any desire to want to follow up from today's conversation, and whether that's directly with you, Jackie, or with me, or with both of us, I'd love that. I think it's just great to learn about where people are. I know that these are all choices that we have to make for ourselves. We have to do it ourselves. But you don't have to be alone also. Like, there are other people going through this. And I think as we talk about it more and share the experiences, it really adds some nice context for people and allows them to make decisions and choices that are best for them. So thank you for the opportunity today. I really enjoyed this.
And that's it for this episode of Beyond Retirement. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. I hope you enjoyed it. Are you ready to start rocking your retirement? Head on over to www.beyondretirement.ca/rocking it and sign up to plan out your own roadmap for retirement. Don't wait till it's too late.